Right, we want to continue, of course, with our conversation with the panelists here this morning, of course, looking at the freedom of the civil society in the recent, of course, happenings that we've seen from yesterday. And allow me to introduce to you this morning Stella Ndirangu. She's a program manager of International Commission of Jurists, ICJ. Also, we do have with us Achieng Akena. She's a lawyer and executive director of Pan-African Citizens Network. Also, we have the chairman of the National Civil Society Congress, Churchill Suba. We have Peter Kiama, who is executive director of Independent Medical Legal Unit. And also, we do have with us also the executive director of Kenya Human Rights Commission. Good morning, gentlemen and ladies.
Good morning.
All right, of course, we've seen this recent development, and there is also a cartoon. I just want to also just run it by you so that maybe you can also comment on it briefly. That has been drawn by Gado today. And this is in the Standard. Let me try and just put it up on air briefly so that we can see. But thereafter them, also in the Daily Nation, we have Munene as well, who has captured that. And I think my director, CK, may just pick up that so that you may see it on the screen. There you go. And we have NGOs, Fazul, and of course, we can see the other hand is coming from where. So that is just left for your speculation this morning. And this is what you've been experiencing. Also in the Standard, we have Gado, who has drawn this for you as well. Let me just try and put it up there for you. You can see that is in the Standard as well. We have the three big shots in the upper reaches of government. That is Arab Singh. Also, we have the Antoinette, and we have also the majority leader there. And they're carrying also a pose of guns. You can see we have the MPs. You have also the president and the puppet there, who is, I think, the commander or the commander of the Kenya Armed Forces as well. And we are saying we have moved on. Now we are implementing our agenda. After NGOs, who's next? Auditor General, media, then you have your ellipsis there. Alama ya dukuduku. Let's begin with Stella. Looking at, of course, this space that you've been given as NGOs that is being stifled right now. Do you read any dark underbelly, especially it coming closely after the general election?
Debarl, thank you. I think for civil society and the crackdown that we are seeing now, we've always anticipated it. The past 4 years under this regime have not been easy for civil society, and it was even in their manifesto under the TNA that they would definitely crack down on civil society. So this is not new. We saw it in 2013 when the regime came into power, and we are seeing it now. We had anticipated it, and we think it will only get worse as we move on.
So you actually saw this in the manifesto in 2013 with the TNA. Why were you mealy-mouthed about this? You never spoke about it until maybe it is way too late. We've seen also the Public Benefit Organization Act that is now in place. Achieng, why were you mealy-mouthed all along? Yet you knew there was something, maybe a tinderbox that was waiting to explode.
I don't think that we have been silent about it. I think people have been speaking about it. There's been a lot of mobilization around the PBO Act. But people don't remember, people don't really pay attention. There's been a lot of mobilization, there's been a lot of information that's been given about these kinds of repressions, and not just in Kenya. In sub-Saharan Africa, there's up to 29 countries that have been repressing civil society, and there are numerous statements that have been given. People have spoken about it, but somehow people don't pay attention until something drastic actually happens.
All right, so, and we can hear also from Peter Kiama. You've been a stalwart on this, fighting for this democratic space, but we've seen gradually they're gaining traction, and we're asking what next. It could be now the civil society, the media will be next. We don't know also. We're just waiting for the other shoe to drop as well. What will be your reaction?
My immediate reaction would be that this is a continuation of this is an opening of a new chapter in a long journey that we have walked with the Jubilee government for the last 4.5 years.
Yes.
It's been a struggle, and the most embarrassing thing about what is happening this week is that we have reached out for the last 4.5 years. Each of these organizations here, even the individuals, we have reached out to the government, various agencies, in terms of saying let's partner and implement the Constitution of Kenya. is required, you know, of all of us. But so this kind of crackdown basically is a serious drawback to those efforts by civil society to try and reach out and try and partner with various government agencies. So it's a shame. It's a shame that on one hand you have emerging partnerships, some very effective partnerships, and then you see this coming across, and you wonder who is behind this. So I think it's a serious embarrassment to this country. All right, you would have a government going this way.
Churchill, you think all the NGOs and the civil societies that we do have are all squeaky clean, or the government is unfair to actually use this broad stroke of brush amongst all the NGOs that we do have in this country?
First of all, I want to clarify that I'm the chairman or presiding convener of the Civil Society Reference Group, which is the umbrella body that has been at the forefront championing for the establishment of an enabling environment for the sector. Secondly is to clarify that not all civil society organizations are registered under the NGO Coordination Act. So that what we have are different legal regimes, one of them being the NGO Coordination Act of 1990, which in our view is obsolete, does not even need to exist, because there is a parallel law that was enacted and assented to by retired President Mwai Kibaki on 14th of January 2013, hence the PBO Act.
Yes.
Now that is the law that should be regulating organizations that previously have been under the NGO Coordination Act. But since the Jubilee administration came into power, it has stymied the operationalization of that new law, and instead continued to invoke very archaic provisions of the NGO Coordination Act, which in our view is unconstitutional because it's a law that has since been repealed by the new law. Secondly, we cannot say that what we see today is a new beginning. I mean, we have gone through this since 2013. You remember as soon as Fazul Mohamed was appointed into office, and it is not that that office used not to have an occupant. There used to be regulators. There used to be a CEO at the NGO board. His first act, administrative act, was to deregister 957 organizations. I mean, it is not that it is only NGOs that are registered. We have SACCOs, we have, other outfits that are registered. We have media. Media are regulated and registered. But we have never seen any of those other regulators doing the kind of shenanigans that we see at the NGO Coordination Board. And therefore, what we are seeing, therefore, is the height of unprofessionalism. We have had issues raised about, the academic qualifications of this so-called CEO, who apparently, and the EACC has even established and published in the Kenya Gazette of 31st of March this year, that indeed the person who was recruited as the CEO at the NGO Coordination Board did not have the requisite academic qualifications. Nobody's bothered about that. Now, what we need to ask today is that who are the relevant officers that should be advising such government agencies and institutions? Where is the Attorney General in all this? Are we not paying as Kenyans somebody in the name of the Office of the Attorney General Department of Justice? What is his role in this? Don't we have a legal office at the NGO Coordination Board? And every time Fazul comes on the screen to announce such number of organizations that he intends to deregister, we have always seen a Mr. Lyndon Otieno. Who is the legal office at that office? We need to begin asking, what is the role of the public paying somebody in the name of a legal officer who does not give the legal advice as required? And what is the role of the Attorney General when organizations that are duly registered under different legal regimes, we have the Companies Act and AFRICOG, for example. Right. It's not an NGO in the strict sense of the word because it's not registered under the NGO Coordination Act. Where Fazul Mohamed gets all these powers to try to muzzle organizations that are not under his docket is something that we need to understand. All right.
Does Fazul Mohamed also, first of all, does he also sit with the board to come up with this decision? Because it is given to understand this is a maverick, is a one-man show. In the first place, is the NGO board really a board as it should be?
Thank you very much, Debarl. Okay, just to understand contextually what is happening in Kenya is part of what has been referred to as closing of civic space, where governments muzzle independent opinion. And independent opinion is not just held by civil society organizations, media, political opposition, grassroots movements, and so on and so forth. Those are independent spaces of existence. Governments crackdown, or there's been a growth in the crackdown of against those types of spaces, and there are many justifications, and the justifications we see for cracking down on us here in Kenya are completely typical of the justifications in those in many other situations. So one of them is that we are pursuing a foreign agenda that tries to change the way that people understand life here. Another accusation is in other contexts, in other countries, is these organizations are anti-religion, for example. So you would have people being accused. There's maybe a state religion or a state-favored religion, and if you are running or you're existing in a space outside of that, they say you're anti-religion. Others would say you are supporting terrorism, and that is the accusation that has been made against us repeatedly during the period that we've had, because we've had a problem of terrorism. So it is a smear thing that is supposed to delegitimize and therefore justify any attempts at cracking down. During the first term of Jubilee, there were at least 5 legislative attempts that were adverse to the sector. Each one of them tried to vilify the sector, to try to minimize its capacity to attract funding, and so on and so forth. The NGO Coordination Board has been a key actor in all those endeavors, and Fazul Mohamed in particular has emerged as a key player in trying to meet those endeavors. The NGO, as established, the NGO Coordination Board is actually a board with Fazul would have been then the CEO. There's a board that has representation from the Attorney General's office, from Treasury and other government departments, but also the NGO Council is represented in that board. So one of the problems that has happened in that space is that the board, as an entity that is a regulator, ceased to exist because of vacancies, and then Mohamed Fazul captured the entity and became the board himself, has never convened a board meeting. So the first dysfunction was there isn't a board that then carries out the internal checks that would happen in a well-functioning organization that then brings a balanced view about life. So you've had no board meeting has happened in that entity. But after that, we've then had a movement in legal regime. So the PBO Act came into force. It's supposed to replace the NGO Coordination Act, but the government has never supported the PBO Act coming into force. So you have the new trying to come into force, and you have the old remaining in force. One of the reasons why Fazul Mohamed has so much fought the old, the new act, is because when it comes into force, it abolishes his office, it abolishes the structures which he currently operates under which he thrives. Something has been said about his personal history and academic credentials. Fazul Mohamed is actually a fraud, and that has been found out by independent bodies. But because he's a fraud, he's also vulnerable. And because he's vulnerable, he's singing for his supper every day. And he finds new ways to do, he finds a new song every day. And so what he does to begin with is he imagines these are the enemies of the regime, so he lashes out at them, and that way he becomes politically useful. Secondly, he also creates ways of carrying favor with figures in the establishment. So we've seen him establish a category of awards that he gives to best performing NGOs, and who are the best performing NGOs? They all happen to be organizations that are linked with people who are close to or strongly involved in the political establishment. So that way he's surviving by hoisting those people up, and also telling them your enemies are also my enemies, so I can be of some good for you. But he's trying to survive.
trying to survive. Maybe I should throw this to Stella. So is Fazul really a lapdog of the government? Because yes, as it seems, queries have been raised over his credentials, even by the ombudsman, right? And that was also shunted away. We saw also queries were raised from the Ministry of Devolution and the Cabinet Secretary of Ministry of Devolution, Njuri. That was shoved away as well. And this particular NGO board that was domiciled in this ministry was moved to the Ministry of Interior. So there's a lot that is really happening, smokes and mirrors that we can see in this particular organization with this particular person, Fazul Mohamed. Why isn't also the civil organization really coming to the fore and trying to say, can we peel back the mask and we see who are the faces and who are the puppeteers behind Fazul Mohamed?
I think a lot of that has been done by civil society. Last year when KHRC was besieged with the same allegations, a process was initiated and questions were raised about Fazul's suitability to be serving in the position that he's serving. And that process led to the Office of the Ombudsman questioning whether Fazul actually had the academic credentials. We've seen the fights that we've had along the way. There are institutions that are willing, we've seen, to support us in questioning whether Fazul should continue to hold office, which in our opinion, as Suba explained, he is not supposed to be holding that office. You remember, and you've rightly alluded to it, when the CS who was in charge of this particular portfolio tried to address the challenges and to address the issue by suspending Fazul, very quickly the office was, the NGO coordination board, the management of it was moved to the Ministry of Interior. And we continued to engage with the Ministry of Interior, expecting good faith relations. And we had made a bit of progress with the now deceased cabinet secretary in Kaiseri, and then the challenge has been, there's been a lot of movement in terms of the minister who is in charge of this. So we keep having to deal with new people. Now we are dealing with the current acting cabinet secretary. We are starting all over again. You saw in his letter yesterday, he says he's seized of these things, and even in his letter he says he sees weighty issues of legal non-compliance. Clearly, he's not well informed, because these issues have been addressed, particularly the KHRC issues, were addressed when they came up earlier this year, and nothing was found. KHRC opened their offices to the Kenya Revenue Authority. They didn't find anything, and we've been moving, and now we are back to the same space. The question is, who actually is calling the shots here? And the cartoon that you just showed today. And that's the question we ask, because when you deal with the highest level that you think is actually calling the shots, you keep finding loopholes and hurdles as you move along. And there's a feeling among the society that actually the cabinet secretaries are not in charge, that someone else is behind Fazul. And from the letter yesterday from the CS, as from the civil society, which gives us 90 days to sit down and address these issues, and you've just run a clip that says what is expected of civil society. I think as civil society, we should not engage with the terms that have been set out by the government. These 90 days should be used to also investigate the NGO board, to also investigate Fazul, and to also push for the operationalization of the right act that is supposed to be regulating civil society. Because if we engage on those terms, we will be here, back here, because you've heard from George that the same allegations that they had are the same ones that were repeated. All that was done is they were put on a different letterhead and a different date. The same allegations for January that we thought we had dealt with. So we'll be back here. So the same
phrasing is the same, George?
Yes.
Is the same letter, is just been revived, or maybe also they've put some of new allegations and some twists and turns into it?
The NGO board has attacked the Kenya Human Rights Commission 3 times now. Now, each time that happens only in the media. They do not write to us as would a regulator. They do not engage us. They engage us through the media. We see these things in the media. We were banned through Twitter. So we wrote to him and asked, is what we are seeing on Twitter coming from your office? Can you please confirm it? And if it comes from your office, can we have an official copy of the letter so that we have an official communication that we've been banned? They refused to receive our letter on record, but they have our letter, and up to now we do not have their letter. The previous time when we came under a previous attack at the beginning of the year in January, I learned about it from the media when they wanted our reactions. Fazul Mohamed had sent these things to the media, but not to us. In 2015, also the same thing. So his modus operandi is operating in the media and then refusing to engage with us and refusing to meet with us. I have characterized him as an attention seeker. So this going out into the media serves his interests as an attention seeker, and doing daily work in an office does not serve the purposes that for which he exists. So
right.
he loses interest as soon as he has made his attack through the media.
It's interesting because all we see is just letters, statements, but we've never seen the face of Fazul himself since he moved out from the national, the NCC, the narcotics. Just kind of remind me that particular organization that he was actually the chair. Nakada, yes. Yeah, yeah. Right. Since he moved from Nakada, we know, making statements. We've never seen him coming to the fore, holding a press conference. All that we see are letters. All that we see are statements, maybe on Twitter, and of course the media now picking that and being fixated on that as well.
But Debarl, that's got to be also an issue with you people as the media. What has happened is every time we have the NGO Council pushing information, pushing out stuff about organizations, the media takes it as gospel truth. It has never questioned the basis for that stuff. It has never asked for Fazul, for example, explain yourself, justify yourself. There are all these things about yourselves. So those are limitations. We are put on the defensive, but it has never been there's never been an occasion for him to justify the things he does.
Yeah, but our efforts also have never fructified, and yeah, we've attempted to actually call him up to come for interviews, call him up maybe to hold a press conference, but that has never really happened. Texts are here that we've sent him, trying to invite him also to come on this particular panel to join you as well, right? So that you can actually have you know, a face-to-face conversation. But we've never been able to create any first time with Fazul. Right, we want to take a short break right now. When we come back, of course, we drill deeper into this, so that now we know that we do have the Public Benefit Organization Act in place. Why is it taking, you know, a very glacial slowness to be effected so far? Is it deliberate, right? Why is it slow on the uptick? And this decision that Fazul is making right now, on which particular law is it predicated, right? That we know we have a new act. Is it predicated on the old National NGO Coordination Board Act or the Public Benefit Organization Act as well? Right, let's continue with this conversation apace, and we now drill deeper. From what particular act is Fazul operating on right now? Is it the old act or is it the PBO Act? Achieng.
Fazul is operating from the old act. Obviously, his position would not exist in the new act. And I think also Fazul forgot the word coordination within his title. The board is supposed to be a coordination group, a coordination board. It's supposed to allow for fair regulation of civil society organizations. It's not supposed to be a vindictive, prosecutorial institution. And earlier we were talking about whether who is behind Fazul.
Yes.
And I think that is really besides the point. We don't have to see the person behind Fazul to understand that his positioning is illegitimate. We are in a democracy that runs on a rule of law. And the law that is supposed to be in operation should be the PBO Act. And the resistance to implement this act is not within the dictates of the democracy that we are. And maybe just to say, the sad thing, Debarl, is that there is international recognition of the role that civil society plays in any democracy.
Yes.
And it's not just civil society. No state is supposed to be autocratic. Even Kim Il-sung of North Korea holds his Day of the Sun to demonstrate to the people his power. And so the people are a critical part of any country. And people exercise their sovereignty through various means, but they also have a critical role to play in any society, as do civil society organizations, as do private sector, as do the government itself, as do various actors within a society.
Yes.
And so that's why what Fazul is doing is not something that we can accept as Kenyans. It's not something that we can accept as Africans. Kenya has been a very big player on the continental scene. It has driven a lot of, it's seen as a thought leader within the region, both in EAC and at the AU. We've driven a lot of agendas at that level, and the AU is very clear about the role of civil society in ensuring that we have thriving democracies.
Mm-hmm. So could we say the activities that we are seeing right now, maybe we can render them null and void, so to speak, because they are predicated on the old act? Peter Kiama?
I would say that the posturing that we are seeing with, from the board is null and void. And I think that's why we need to peg our discussion.
Yes.
We have a new law that's supposed to govern the sector. We have gone to court, I think, twice now to get the government to implement that law. The court has made a decision. The Ministry of Interior is in contempt of that of a court order.
Yes.
And therefore, for us, we have moved on from the NGO Coordination Act to the PBO Act. And I think the country needs to, reposition around that. And we're asking, why is the ministry refusing to implement a court order? The same ministry that is asking us to go before it. The Kenya Human Rights Commission and Africa have been asked to go to a meeting to meet this committee chaired by the permanent secretary, the principal secretary in the Ministry of Interior. The question is, should they go to before this particular committee under a ministry that is in contempt of a court order? And I think we do need to respect our institutions. The judiciary has made it very clear that the law that governs the civil society in this country is the PBO Act. So the least we would expect from the ministry is for the ministry to implement the court order by gazetting the PBO Act, and then we proceed that way. Many people might not know, those who have not seen the Act. The Act actually holds us to account more than we have been held to account ever before. So I do think that there is a need for government to implement this Act and allow us to move on guided by the new law, which actually complies with the new constitution, unlike the NGO Coordination Act, which was established under the old constitution. Mm-hmm. So I do think that these actions are null and void.
Null and void. And of course, we had, if history may bear us down, if we may go maybe to 3 months ago, when also the Nairobi Court Judge Mativo had ordered the Interior Minister, the late Interior Cabinet Secretary Joseph Nkaiserry, to publish in the Gazette within the next 30 days the commencement date of the PBO Act 2013, and the judge declared that the Kenyan government was clearly in contempt of court over its failure to comply with a similar ruling 8 months ago. And this brings to question as well, as I was saying, why was there this glacial slowness to try and, also effect this particular act in the first place? Remember
that the NGOs sector was under the Ministry of Devolution and Planning.
Yes.
Where we actually fall under. If you look at that ministry, the ministry is in charge of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's our business. That's what we work with government on. If you look at where we were placed after, an attempt to run away from implement a court order, we were moved to the Ministry of Interior. If you look at the Ministry of Interior, it's mainly around security.
Yes.
Security and other matters that relate to safety and security of this country. We do not find ourselves properly in that particular ministry. We would prefer to be in the Ministry of Devolution, where we can work with government, partner with government, collaborate with government and other actors to implement the National Development Agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's say from Churchill, because first...
You see, Debarl, I like the question you have asked. Why would the government not want a new legislative framework that it itself, brought into place? First of all, I want to say that before the PBO Act,
yes,
we had sessional paper number 1 of 2006 that was adopted under the Kibaki regime that set the stage for a new regulatory framework, and that is what brought forth the PBO Act. Secondly, the only reason, in fact, the reason why the Jubilee government does not want to implement the PBO Act is because it prohibits all these arbitrary administrative actions that Fazul resorts to every time. The old Act, first of all, is unconstitutional because if you look at Article 36 of the Constitution, it says that if there is people have the freedom of association, and 2, if there is any association that requires a registration, such registration cannot be taken away without being accorded a hearing. And so they are still using the old Act because it creates room for these arbitrary and administrative actions that they resort to. Secondly, the PBO Act creates an appeal mechanism. In addition to the Public Benefit Regulatory Authority, which is supposed to take over the place of the NGO Coordination Board, there's a Public Benefit Organization Tribunal within the legal framework. So that if anyone is not satisfied with the decision of the regulatory authority, there's an appeal mechanism established, and a tribunal composed of people who are competent to be judges of the High Court and who are therefore able to listen to any mechanisms. Thirdly, the PBO Act, unlike the NGO Act, sets time frames so that if you are to apply to be registered as a public benefit organization, the regulator has specific time frames within which to respond. Now, the NGO Coordination Act does not have those time frames. So what Fazul does is that if somebody makes an application to apply, he can take forever. And what we know is that there is a lot of extortion going on. In fact, one of the motivations for delisting organizations is that once you are delisted, you are expected to go meekly before them, plead for reinstatement of your registration, upon which they'll make certain demands for money. We know that Haki Africa had to pay 1 million shillings to get their registration back. The NGO, Fazul and his colleagues were actually demanding 3 million. So that has been the basis on which they intimidate. The reason KHRC has been a persistent victim of delisting is that it has refused to give bribes. Every time it is delisted, as a principle, KHRC has taken the position that we have a right to be registered unless there are reasons that would mitigate against our registration. So the KHRC and other organizations have become victims because they have not played ball to extortion rings within the NGO board and the Department of Immigration.
I think this extortion rings, that is what we really need to talk about, because of course there is a collusion within that particular board that we know, and this is information also coming to hand, not only just from you, we've heard before, where yes, they are trying to extort people. We saw that it was splashed on the newspapers, 500 NGOs had been deregistered first of all, but also without any due diligence, without really going with the proper due process that is supposed to go in the first place. First of all, why haven't you really spoken about this particular extortion that is happening within that particular? Because it seems, yes, you're taking special umbrage with what is happening in the board, but none of you have actually been very vocal about the extortion that is going within that particular board itself.
Well, we have never been the... nobody has tried to extort the Kenya Human Rights Commission because I think they know they can't.
But collectively, you and the convener of course the NGOs and the Churchill, this I think will be the concerns you should raise in the first place.
I was going to go there.
Thank you.
But we have become aware of extortion as a big as a motivation for what is represented as regulatory action. When General Kaiseri was still around, we met with him in January when an attempt to close us down was made, and we raised with him very strongly the question of extortion. It actually happened at that time that a different organization from ourselves had been deregistered because it was 5 days late in filing annual returns, and then the complaint that then escalated all the way to the ministers. We were unaware of that complaint ourselves, except we got to know about it from him when we raised the issue of extortion. Then we understand that people within the NGO board, or somebody within the NGO board, we don't know who, had demanded 5 million shillings as so as to accept the returns, or otherwise the organization would be banned. Now, so the minister had become aware of that complaint had come to him, and I think a negotiation had happened, and the organization was supposed to pay 500,000 shillings and get its registration. It found that to be unfair, and it kept escalating, and the matter got to the minister. And I remember the minister was saying, I didn't know how any majambazi I'm working with. So if Nkaiseri knew he was working with majambazi, he had opportunity to do something about it. I don't know why that did not happen, but that is an issue that has definitely been raised.
And it's not just about registration, Debarl. It's about foreigners working in the sector seeking to either obtain or renew work permits. Today, for a foreign national working with the sector to get his permit renewed, they get extorted. And this is something they are afraid to speak about because out of fear of reprisals, but it's something that needs to be brought to the fore. I know of individuals working with foreign organizations that have chosen to operate from Kampala, that have chosen to operate from Addis Ababa, so long as they are able to do their work within the region, because Kenya is a hub, not just for the country itself, but for the region. Kenya is where international organizations come and establish their headquarters so that they are able to operate in war-torn countries like Somalia, like South Sudan, like any other countries in the region. But when organizations now take the painful decision of relocating their staff to other capitals in the region, just because an individual wants to extort their nationals, yet as a country, we always see on the media of how much Kenyans in the diaspora are emitting. Don't we even have the conscience to say that the people from those capitals where our own citizens are, you know, we live in an environment of bilateral reciprocity. How you treat nationals of other countries is how you do expect those capitals also treat your nationals. Right. But if as a country, we always, proudly splash on headlines of these billions brought in by Kenyans in the diaspora, yet we have allowed an individual to frustrate nationals of those capitals, a point will come in time when those capitals will also begin to ask, what are these nationals doing here when our own nationals are mistreated
but is
in Kenya?
it within their remit also as a board, yeah, to try and also stem on what is happening? Because we have so much influx of also expatriates in this country who are coming to do jobs that, Kenyans, they have the capacity and the qualifications to do in the first place, right?
That I agree. I agree entirely. I agree entirely. But we are saying that if that was to apply to every sector, let's not isolate the civil society sector as the only one that brings expatriates. Yes, there are expatriates working in the sector. There are international organizations based here. And therefore, because they have international boards, their jobs are advertised internationally. The person who qualifies to be a country director may not necessarily be a Kenyan. But we are saying let that policy apply equally to people in the private sector. Today we have people in Kenya Airways, for example, who are foreign nationals. Are we saying that there's no Kenyan that can do that? We have Kenyans riding motorcycles in South Sudan. Are you saying the Dinka, the Nuer, the Acholi of South Sudan cannot ride motorcycles? That those are jobs. If the government of South Sudan was to say, we do not want any Kenyan, any Ugandan riding motorcycles in our country, would they base it on the fact that that is a job that South Sudanese can do? We live in a very fluid world, in a global village where people transverse borders. We have Kenyans in Uganda. I spent my last night in Kampala in a Kenyan hotel. What if the government of Uganda were to say that there are Ugandans who can own these hotels? Okay,
let's hear from Stella, because first of all of you are not really happy, especially with the Public Benefit Organization Act in itself when it was being crafted. I don't know if all of you were approached to be stakeholders on this, because there was also a special umbrage that was raised from the NGO sector, the people from the civil society. They're saying, oh, this is an attempt by the government to clamp us down, right? Were you happy, wholesale, as a sector with the PBO Act? Stella?
Yes, I think we've walked a journey in developing the PBO Act to where we are now, up to the point where it was adopted, and we've been pushing for its implementation because we are satisfied with it as it is. Initially, there were a bit of concerns, but over time we got included. There was inclusivity in trying to develop the law, and we got included, and we felt satisfied to the point at which it was being adopted. So yes, we are happy with the Act, and that is the Act we want to be regulated under.
All right, so what were some of the contentious maybe articles or clauses that you saw they were really working against that, right? Any of you can actually pick up on this?
Actually, we were not opposed to the PBO Act. What we were opposed to is the amendments. Remember, President Kibaki assented to that law before he left office in early 2013. And on that basis, then, the law was supposed to take effect. But what happens when the new government comes into place in April? They begin amending it before implementing it. That is what we were opposed to, because some of the proposed amendments were going to be very injurious to civil society. For example, the whole issue of limiting funds coming to the sector. Those were not provisions in the Act as it is now. There were attempts to interfere with the very strong provisions within that particular Act, to actually dilute the Act that had been put in place through a very involving process. Most stakeholders in the sector and government and other sectors were involved in drafting that particular law. And so we were happy with it as of when President Kibaki ascended to it. So it is the amendments that we were opposed to, that we thought were going to dilute the provisions of that Act, I think.
All right, so where is the office of the Ombudsman? Also, they raised concerns. Are you working in tandem with this particular office, or also the concerns that they raised, where are they tucked away also with your frustrations currently, what you're experiencing with the government? Akena?
Well, maybe first what I can say, Debarl, is I think we need to take a step back and think about why laws are put into place. Laws are not just there, they serve a particular purpose. The purpose of the PBO Act is to regulate civil society, not to penalize civil society. And the aspect of penalization comes in actually from a different dimension. Unfortunately, we live in countries where our governments are actually afraid of their own citizens. And so they try to put measures to repress their own citizens. And when you consider that as being an underlying factor, it starts to make sense why an act that is supposed to be regulatory turns around and becomes a punitive measure rather than a regulatory one. And it's incumbent on the different constitutional bodies to ensure that the rule of law remains, and not just the rule of law, but also the national values that we uphold in our constitution. It's incumbent on all the different constitutional bodies to ensure that these national values and the laws that are valid continue to guide this country.
All right. Yes,
just to add to what my sister said, and in answer to your question, whether we are working with the Office of the Ombudsman, yes, it is true that when we petitioned in 2016, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, when the first allegations about Fazul's academic qualifications or lack of them came up, we did also petition the Office of the Ombudsman. Because we were, by that time, operating on the basis that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission had taken too long. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission started investigating the issues around Fazul's credibility in November 2015.
Yes.
And by end of last year, they had not come up with any report. So we decided to petition them to conclude their investigations, and also at the same time petition the Office of the Ombudsman.
Yes.
And just as we expected, the Office of the Ombudsman came up with a report within 3 months. And it was a damning report. A damning report about all these extortions, a damning report about abuse of office, a damning report about lack of academic papers, and a damning report about, you know, very punitive actions against staff. As we speak now, there are 2 members of the NGO Coordination Board that are in court for wrongful dismissal. The court ordered that they be reinstated. Fazul did not reinstate them. Now they are back in court for contempt. So it is not the first time that Fazul is in contempt of court. So it is true that we are working with the office. Currently, we have also petitioned the Office of the Ombudsman to investigate. Remember in 2016, there was this organization called Sub-Saharan Africa Safe Promotion Foundation. You remember this organization that was extorting money from young people on the premise that they would be creating jobs. And they were promising very outrageous salary scales.
Yes, yes.
It has since turned out that there was no such organization. It was one of the board's strategy to vilify the sector and portray it as unaccountable, as corrupt, as fraudulent. So this happened in 2016. You remember in Kasarani when young people turned out from across the country and they were being asked to pay money in order to be given jobs. They did the same in Kajiado. We have petitioned the Office of the Ombudsman to investigate any role that the NGO Coordination Bureau, headed by Fazul, assisted by the legal officer, Lyndon Otieno, and any other staff in that office that may have crafted such a non-existent organization only for purposes of vilifying and portraying the civil society negatively. So we are closely working with the Ombudsman's office.
All right.
To this date.
Okay, maybe I should throw this to you, George Kegoro, because them really coming hard on you right now together with AFRICOG is maybe bearing the fact that, yes, we're just coming from an election, and you've been very vocal on some of the electoral process that we went through. Questions have been brought to the fore. We've heard also from the CEO of IBC, some of 34As being realized on their website. They've been signed, but some of the numbers have not actually been tabulated there as well. They've come really to clarify this. So there's a lot of issues that is really coming with this particular election, and you have been very vocal. Together also with AFRICOG, they raised concerns about the voter registration, and they wanted that to be also subjected to the public, of which we never experienced as well. Do you think this is politically motivated? Just coming after the declaration of a president, bang, we're here. The Auditor General also is under threat because of some statements that have been pronounced by Majority Leader Ed Ndwale. Bang, we're here now with you, Kenya Human Rights Commission. AFRICOG also smack dab in the middle.
If it smells like it is politically motivated and looks like it is politically motivated, then it is politically motivated.
Does it smell in the first place? Does it
yes,
look and smell?
It does. Yes, it does, Debarl. All week, we've been receiving calls, and people from the political establishment have been reaching out to find out whether or not, for example, we're going to file an election petition in relation to the elections that we had last week. And it's a question that remains under a consideration by a sector group that we are working with called Kurayangu Sauti Yangu. Kenya Human Rights Commission, AFRICOG are key members of that. And remember, AFRICOG was the organization that we put in front in a coalition of civil society organizations that challenged the presidential results in 2013. So the expectation by the political establishment that we could do something like that this time around is not misplaced. Is not there's precedent to that effect. So obviously, I think we are viewed as sort of going against the political establishment. We were one of the early groups that raised questions about the tallying of presidential results. We were actually the first group as a coalition. Kurayangu Sauti Yangu and colleagues on this table have been part of that. We were the first ones to raise questions about what IBC, the various levels of inconsistency in terms of the results that IBC was projecting. We've spoken up against, out against the very premature qualification of, the very premature pronouncement by the international observers that this election was the best we have ever had, and pointed out that voting day, seeing people queuing in orderly lines has never been our problem. Our problems come after the voting during tallying. So that is the posture we've taken. It is a posture in relation to which we felt isolated, because the political establishment, the media, the country has been presenting us with this narrative that this is a free, fair, good election, and so on and so forth. So we can't help feeling that what is happening to us is not unconnected with the political positioning that we've taken around these issues. But our political position is not taken merely because we want to cause trouble. Debarl, elections are the only way in which societies can peacefully change their leadership. We've got to give elections the seriousness that they deserve. If elections fail, the elections 2017 has been characterized by some as our last chance to find peace with each other. We've been to near war with each other, and if this election, the last stage of getting this election right starts with the Supreme Court decision that, the Supreme Court challenge that we expect for the next 14 days. If that is not viewed as dealing satisfactorily with the grievances that we have in this country, some of which elections are capable of solving, then we really do ourselves a disservice and set ourselves down a path of significant political instability. So we raise these issues not because we want to cause trouble, but because they are necessary for getting some political stability in this country. We have issues of political exclusion which have been compounded by how this election has turned out, and those are some of the issues that we've tried to speak to, and that it may be unpopular to speak about at this time.
So isn't it maybe frustratingly difficult for you that you can try to uncouple yourself, because parties have come to the fore? They've said, of course, George Kegoro has his own opinion about this. We cannot try and demarcate a line between you, the human rights defender, and you, George Kegoro, who is having, of course, you're entitled to your own opinion through the column, and you've been anti-government. So where do we draw a line that we can see you in that shining, luminous light, you as a human rights defender, and not clouded with, this shroud of your own opinion and you leaning on one side?
I don't know. If you think that I lean on one side, that's your opinion. The same way that it is my opinion that what we've tried, what I do, and what colleagues do. I'm not alone. We are a large group of colleagues. We do it using very many different methods. One of the methods is that we use the media a lot, like everybody else uses the media. If you don't use the media, then you speak to yourself. You can't reach out to a large number of people. So we use the media through the privilege of being able to write in columns, through also coming out to speak in programs such as these, and we put across our position as much as possible. We try to support the positions that we develop on the basis of the evidence as much as we're able to find that evidence. We accept that there will be opinions about our positions in the same way that we have opinions about the positions of other people. So that is how society runs, and no one exists in a compartment where you are only this and not the other. All of us are first of all citizens. Then we represent our organizations and the interests that we view as valid and defining us in society. We are all political actors. All of us are political actors. When we go to vote, that is a political action. The fact that you take a ballot to go and vote makes you a political actor. You care politically, you want a political outcome, and you need to follow that political outcome, and you need to campaign for your view of how the politics in the country should be organized. So we use all our platforms to advocate for our preferred political action. So there's nobody who is not political in nature. If you take a vote, if there are 19 million voters and even younger people, including kids at home, have politics is such that they also have a view, it's just that they don't have votes. So we are all definitely political actors, and we use every platform to urge our political action. And also the restraint to use platforms is also a way of urging political action, because sometimes you engage, sometimes you withdraw from engaging because you feel you don't need to engage, because the efforts that you would have put in has already been compensated by the engagement of others.
All right, so Stella, there is no demilitarized zone that we can see, right, when it comes to NGO, the civil society and the government. There will always be accusatory fingers, so to speak, raised. You know, we'll point to the government, the government will point at you. So at what point do we have this happy medium that you and the government, they'll maybe see eye to eye?
I think, Debarl, the narrative that civil society is anti-government or civil society actors are anti-government is a false narrative for various reasons, and we've seen it used at the convenience of anyone who wants to pass that particular message. And we've seen even the media at this particular time during elections sometimes being accused of being biased. And there are times where we've engaged with government, especially this government, even as we have said, it's been a difficult season the last 4 years, but there are many instances where we've engaged with government and we've had very good results. And I can give you one clear example. If you look at the Jubilee manifesto, one of the clear achievements that they've set out that they achieved in their 4 years was the registration of the Makonde as citizens of this country. That was not an initiative that was initiated by the Jubilee government. That initiative was initiated by civil society and specifically led by Kenya Human Rights Commission. Kenya Human Rights Commission helped the Makonde people over time to try and seek recognition as citizens of this country. And when it failed, they organized them, they supported them, they worked with them all the way from Kwale to Nairobi. And when we got to Nairobi, that is when the government took over and took them to State House and listened to their concerns and was able to address those concerns, and registration was eventually offered. It is an achievement of the Jubilee government in their manifesto as we speak. But they will not say that this has been a collaborative effort with civil society. So civil society is necessary in this country. It is necessary, and when it is convenient, civil society is delegitimized. But when it is convenient, we work with them. And there are many of the laws that we have right now. We've talked about the PBO Act here, but there are many other laws that have been adopted by this government that have been efforts of civil society. The first drafts have come from civil society. We've worked hand in hand with different government institutions to make sure that we're realizing the gains of our new constitution. So it is, I think it's a false narrative, and it needs to be called what it is. And as you've heard, everyone is political. You have a political leaning, whether or not you like it, for every particular citizen. And when it is convenient, when it is possible, we work with government to deliver. When it is not possible, we call it out. We call them out where they are failing. And when you call them out when they are failing, that is when you are considered to be supporting other agents who are anti-government. But we need to be clear that there are some gains that have been made by this government that are particularly can be traced back to efforts by civil society.
All right, Akena, why are you really happy with the pronouncement by the international observers who are here in the country that the entire process was free, fair, and credible? And why didn't we hear from also the civil society speaking against, of course, these particular statements, if you were not happy with the observation?
I think that the announcement by the international community was rather premature. It's something that could have waited. I'm not sure, I haven't really looked it up, but I think it's rather unusual to issue preliminary statements by election observer missions. They usually wait till the conclusion of the process and then give an analysis of the entire process. But in this case, they gave us preliminary statements. And that rush helped to, or fostered a particular narrative that was not constructive and did not help, and actually facilitated the marginalization and the repression that we're seeing now. Because instead of it being a fair playing ground.
Yes.
Organizations like KHRC are being seen as the few remaining resistance, rather than it being seen that there was not everybody, whether you accept the results or not everybody voted in a particular way. And so rather than fostering a climate that allows for dissension, driving a particular narrative that's saying the election was free and fair and people should either accept or go to court, actually hardened the environment, made it more hostile, and made it look like there were a few people, a few instances of resistance left. And if you'll just allow me, Debarl, to point out that another reason why elections are such a difficult time for us is not just because it's a time for change. It's also because the sovereignty that we as a people have, when we say we the people, is usually outsourced to our politicians. And so we only get to exercise it in this 5-year ballot. And so it's because of that, we feel that because there's such limited spaces for our participation and for our expression of our citizenship, it makes this 5-year ballot very high stakes. And so it is not in government interest to further suppress civic space. It's actually in their interest to increase the avenues in which people can participate, to relieve the pressure off of this every 5-year once participation where our voices matter. To move away from, even when you talk about politics, people will always say, kuna wenyewe. So people almost think that that's for others. And yet the Constitution doesn't say we some people. It says we the people. It's everybody. So however it is that we're to move forward, we need to foster a culture where people feel that they are part and parcel of this country and not just the other of the wenye inchi.
Other of the wenye inchi, because we're having this narrative that, yes, even yesterday we were discussing here when we say the wenye inchi, we are operating on the Pareto principle of the 80-20, where we have the majority being led by this minority here. But what will be the place of the civil society to come and actually debunk or try to, cut this Gordian knot that we do have currently? That, yes, we've outsourced our politics we've outsourced our country to the politicians. And it seems we can't get out of there. What will be the prime solution coming from the civil society? Maybe we can hear from Peter Kiama.
Yeah, Debarl, the first thing I want to say is that we do not feel as civil society that we have to justify our existence. Because, as Akena says, it's already provided in the Constitution of Kenya.
Yes.
That space is there. We haven't maybe even exploited 50% of what is provided in this Constitution. Now, in terms of the role we can play, I think we've been playing our role very well, despite the challenges that we have faced, especially in the last 4.5 years. And I'd like to say this, that the perception that we are anti-government is misplaced. We are a critical actor in governance in this country, and we will remain that way. If we begin moving towards an uncritical approach to our work, then we are going to fail the provisions of this Constitution, and we are going to fail the promises we've made to the people of Kenya, that we will remain critical. And the Constitution provides for accountable governance, responsive governance. That's the only thing we are asking for, that let's work together to ensure that we have an accountable, responsive, inclusive government. When we see those things lacking, those values lacking in our governance architecture, we will raise our voice on behalf and together with the people of Kenya. So that is our role, and I think we continue playing that without any apologies. We owe it to ourselves and our future generations, as the preamble of the Constitution says, to ensure that we defend it. And I think we need to disabuse the notion that we are afraid. We're not afraid. Why are we not afraid? We're not afraid because at the most difficult moments in this country, going back 20, 30 years, you always find civil society there. And the promise we are making to the people of Kenya is, however difficult things become even now, you will find us there. We promise you that. You will find us there. They might try to dismantle computers. They might try to interfere with our communication gadgets, but we will be there. Because that space can never be taken away by any regime, by any person in this country. That's what we are promising the people of Kenya, that this is their space. We actually operate as NGOs in a civic space with the permission of the people. If we try to depart from what the people have told us to do, then the people have a right to tell us to vacate that space because it is their space. We are operating in that common space. So what we promise to do is to continue occupying that space to ensure an inclusive government, an accountable government, a government that is responsive to the needs and the rights of the people of this country.
Right. I'll be remiss if I don't really ask you as well, because you're a human rights defender. There was an act of torture with Chris Musando, and of course people have been talking about the government. They're not really very certain that they'll have a very, you know, a very objective outcome from this particular autopsy and the results as well. You, as independent medical legal unit, you've done a lot, of course, of investigations. How are you heavily involved with this case of Chris Musando? Because if we leave it to the government, of course, we know, we do not say the government perpetrated this evil, but of course many people have, they question also the credibility of the postmortem.
But we are proceeding, we are moving towards where the evidence is leading us, as one of our good friends said earlier, a few years ago. We are following the evidence. And I wouldn't like to say much because we are working with people who are risking their lives to give us the evidence. One, evidence of, you know, excessive use of force by the police. We have begun, you know, following up on the post-mortem process. We are very happy that the Independent Police Oversight Authority is keenly following this and collaborating with quite a number of actors, including ourselves, to establish the truth. And so far, I think we are doing quite well. So we are hoping that the evidence through the medical legal documentation, through you know, statements by lawyers from witnesses, that we'll be able to establish a very solid case that yes, excessive force was used by some police officers in some of the areas that you know, we had challenges with on Friday night and Saturday morning last weekend. Okay. So that is progressing quite well. But we have a challenge. And the challenge is that a good number of people, families, individuals, are afraid to come out. So we are still requesting, we are still appealing, especially to if there are any people who are injured, to come forward. And I think the Kenya Red Cross earlier on, you know, in the crisis, got a guarantee from the Kenya government that if there are people with injuries still, you know, suffering in silence, they should approach Kenya Red Cross and they will be supported. And I think they should, you know, approach Kenya Red Cross through their telephone lines or through anybody else they can trust to hold their hand. We're also appealing to those who have evidence of officers who, you know, conducted themselves illegally or against the law to come out and give us the evidence. They'll be protected. All right. Yeah.
Churchill, even as we had...
sorry, just to say, but we're also appealing now, having seen that even babies died through brutal force, which is a shame, you know, for officers of the law to perpetrate such heinous crimes against children. We are appealing to the Ministry of, the Minister for the Cabinet Secretary for Interior to make a public apology. Because he went out at the beginning and said, the police have not conducted themselves in any manner that contravenes the law. Now we know that that happened. Even when he was pronouncing himself, we already had provided evidence, you know, to government agencies that you know, violations were committed. So we are appealing to him to, you know, he has done very well in the Ministry of Education, I guess, you know, in terms of you know, tackling the cartels head on. I think he needs to do the same and not apply double standards here. Do the same with regard to the conduct of some of the officers that we saw. But at least start with an apology to the family of Samantha and the family of Mora. I think that is the least we would expect.
Maybe
to help us to move forward more proactively and together, because this is a collaborative effort.
Right. So maybe with the Ministry of yes.
Before we move on to the next question, just to add on to the appeals, I think it's important once it is established that excessive force was used, that also most of these families come from very poor backgrounds. They are struggling. Many of them have raised it with us, particularly that they are unable to cover the expenses, the medical expenses, and also the funeral expenses. And so there's also another appeal that needs to go to the government to intervene where it can, because we've seen them intervene in very high-profile funerals, very high-profile cases. I think these families deserve to be assisted to be able to move to closure in terms of burying their kin who are killed and who are not armed and who were found in the wrong place.
Thank you. Right, maybe as we are preparing also our headline thoughts, we begin with you, Churchill. Looking at this space, now he's starting with the NGOs, and aptly captured also by the cartoon there by Gado. You can see they're saying, yes, he's the NGOs, next now is the Auditor General, maybe the next step will be the media, and we don't know where else it's going to head. Of course, we know there's Article 99 that really also fight for the freedom of the media and the journalists as well. But we're not hearing from the civil society when it comes to Auditor General also and the threat of his office, because we know we had also the Public Auditor Act that now is in place, and some of his powers were also stifled. Why have you also been mealy-mouthed about this? Because injustice anywhere, as Martin Luther said, is injustice everywhere.
Debarl, I don't think the civil society has kept aloof in terms of defending other independent offices and institutions. You remember, this thing did not start yesterday. We have had instances when the Kenya Information and Communications Act, for instance, was enacted. Amendments were introduced to the Media Council of Kenya Act. You remember how civil society teamed up with media practitioners and journalists to protect that space. We have been acting in solidarity with the media, particularly around the court cases that the media owners filed against those legislations. It is not just the media again. You remember attempts to tax tithes that are given in churches. The religious sector has become a victim of this. Remember, the president had to intervene. We do not know whether his intervention was in response to his own policy or instruction to the Attorney General, when there was an attempt by the Attorney General's office to impose certain taxes on the religious sector. The trade union movement, one of the reasons that you saw a number of trade union organizations aligning themselves towards the opposition during the elections was partly because the trade union movement also got affected. We had a government minister launching a parallel trade union to KOTU. So every sector in terms of civic space has been affected. And civic space is about the space for citizens. You know, we are just organizations, but civic space is about ordinary citizens going about their life, making their contribution in the management of public affairs. So it should not be taken that civil society is just organizations. We have civil societies about citizens, either acting individually, like my friend Okia Omtata occasionally does, when you showed us his, where he had chained himself to the police headquarters. So I think, and now in answer to your question, I think there is need for all these actors to come together, identify common areas of collaboration so that together we can work and protect this space. One of the things that as civil society reference group we want to do is to identify media practitioners and journalists that we can then train on how to report on civic space issues. Because some of the comments we have seen, again coming from the media, we have seen such derogatory comments as NGO types. Now when it fits the media, they will refer to us as NGO types. That to me is a bit derogatory. And we should be seeing ourselves as potential partners that can act together to protect this space. So we'll be very soon inviting you, among others, for a particular training on civic space, because not every journalist has any training on these civic space issues. These are emerging concerns that may not be in the curriculum that is used to train journalists.
Thank you. Finally,
can I say this now that you mentioned the Auditor General?
The Auditor General, briefly, because we are really strapped for time.
Yes, to say this, there are many things we do to support the strengthening of government institutions and to defend the independence of individuals within the public service that never come to the limelight because they're not supposed to, but they're important to us. I'll give you a good example. At the time when we had, the 2014, we had the Miscellaneous Amendment Act that was meant to interfere with the independence of the police service. We sat with the Committee for Legal Affairs in Parliament to defend the right of junior officers to have representation during disciplinary proceedings, because that was being amended to ensure that they are as vulnerable as possible during disciplinary proceedings. And we succeeded, for the benefit of junior officers in the service, to say that, to ensure that there's a provision that they have representation. I don't want to say anymore. There are many things we do to support the strengthening of government institutions for the benefit of all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Judge Kegoro, now we have the Principal Secretary asking you and AFRICOG to come with your registration certificates, a list of board members or trustees, their tax compliance certificates, and also list of donors over the past 3 years. You also need to provide details of the funding you have received and purposes of the funding. A committee will also deliberate on the projects you've carried out in the last 3 years by AFRICOG and, of course, Kenya Human Rights Commission. You're also required to come along with a list of your staff, including details of expatriates you have employed. Do you think the government is overplaying their hands with all these requirements?
Yeah, I think the problem has been that I think the new cabinet secretary probably means well with in his attempt to resolve this issue, but he's still not as well informed as he ought to be about what the problem is. It assumes that the accusations that have been made against us have got a basis, and we make the point that they don't have a basis whatsoever. So there are certain assumptions that that list of demands is based on, and those assumptions are not correct, and we'll make that point at an appropriate time and in an appropriate way. But generally speaking, also our key problem has been that the government does not come with clean hands around this issue. There are court orders that have not been obeyed in relation to the PBO Act. So if they would like to resolve these issues, the one thing would then require they do is they need to obey the court order, because the court order is not our order. It's a judgment of the court that says they must act in a certain way. We've said certain things about Fazul. The relationship is strained. We can't have a good faith engagement if Fazul remains in office. And if that's not going to change, then it's going to be difficult for any of these engagements to bear fruit.
So what?